I'm going to be talking in this video about what I think is the absolute worst talking point I've ever heard from a Christian apologist. I thought about calling this the worst argument I've ever heard from a Christian apologist, but it's not really an argument. An argument has to have a particular structure, it has to have premises and a conclusion. I thought it could be a particular kind of argument that we call an enthymeme. An enthymeme is an argument where one or more of the premises is implicit or is not stated, but I don't think it's that either. It seems to me that what I'm about to describe to you, or what you're about to hear, is actually simply a talking point that you use in apologetics for persuasion purposes. And I think that this is just a terribly unpersuasive talking point. In fact, I think it's just a terrible one. The talking point comes from Frank Turek. And it's on a university campus, I believe. It's in a video that we're about to look at, just a short clip from the video where he's answering a question with respect to biblical violence and the killing of Canaanites. So here's the video. It's called, "Is God Immoral Because of the Atrocities Committed in the Old Testament?" And Turek makes several points here that I think are not good points. I'm going to highlight at least one of the other ones in a video later, which is actually the first one you can see on the screen there. If there is no God, why is any Old Testament atrocity wrong? We'll come back to that in a subsequent video, but I wanted to talk about another one. So you can see it here. He says, "Is God committing murder by ending lives on earth?" Now, I think there are points that there's a conversation to be had about this general point. The general point being that it's we shouldn't assume that if God creates something, he is obligated to sustain it in perpetuity. I mean, God can choose to cease to sustain something in existence that he once brought into existence. I think it's God's prerogative as a creator to do so. But the issue here is not whether God is simply required to sustain something in existence in perpetuity. Let's say, for example, hypothetically, that God created human beings and gave them wonderful full lives. And at the year 100, when they turned 100, they would just gradually fade away painlessly, surrounded by loved ones, having lived a wonderful, good life. Would people begrudge God for not having given them more years than 100 years? Maybe some people would, but I think for the most part, people would say, yeah, you know what? God gave that person a good, long 100-year life. He gives it to all of us. And we all end our lives pleasantly surrounded by loved ones and painlessly drifting off into eternity. And God is not obligated to keep us in existence in perpetuity on earth. So this last point on that score, fine. I don't have a quibble with it. The issue here is not whether God is obligated to keep people in existence. The issue is about God commanding an army to hack apart civilians, to stab and smite and slay men, women, and children with spear and sword. That's the issue that we're talking about here. Now, at this point, we come to the talking point itself. It's a short one, but listen closely, and then I'm going to give my 2 cents.
In fact, if Christianity's true, people don't really die, they just change locations, right? They go from this life to the next life, and God can do that whenever he wants.
Okay. So that's the talking point, which I've heard Frank Turek issue at other times as well. The talking point again is this, that if Christianity is true, people don't actually die, they just change locations. So it's not that bad. That's a terrible, terrible talking point. Think about applying that talking point in other circumstances. The Nazis didn't really kill 6 million Jews. They just helped them change locations from Germany to eternity. Who would argue like that? Who would make such a claim as that? The issue isn't about changing locations. The issue is about people being hacked apart, being murdered, being slaughtered with sword and spear. That's the issue that we're talking about when it comes to the Canaanites. I mean, that's in terms of talking points. There's this old saying, "Don't spit on my shoe and tell me it's raining." Don't try to gaslight me into thinking something isn't really what it is. And in this case, the thing that we're talking about is human beings murdering or killing. Let's maybe not beg the question. Rather than call it murder, we'll just call it indiscriminate killing of civilians with sword and spear in ancient Canaan. But that's what we're talking about. How could God command and commend actions such as like men, women, and children, the elderly, the handicapped, infants being stabbed with spears and being hacked apart with swords? It's not just changing locations. And when you describe moral atrocities like this as changing locations, it is trying to gaslight you. It's trying to get you to question your own reality. And it's fundamentally disingenuous. And that, from my mind, because it's disingenuous, it's, I think, dishonest as an apologetic. I mean, Frank Turek must know that there's really nothing there to that kind of response. That gets from me the vote of the worst apologetic talking point of all time.